The scent of lemon pie and old books clung to the air of my living room, a scent that was as much a part of me as the faded floral sofa I sat on. Today was supposed to be a day of quiet remembrance, the 50th anniversary of my marriage to my George. Instead, it was an ambush. My son Daniel, with his meticulously trimmed goatee, and his wife Laura, whose silk blouse with the color of a fresh bruise, had arrived first. They brought with them a cold, clinical air that always seemed to follow them like a shadow. My daughter Emily, looking as brittle and stylish as a porcelain doll, and her husband Mark, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, followed close behind. They didn't bring flowers or a card. They brought a box. "Mom, we were just so concerned," Daniel began, placing the box on the coffee table with a thud. "We were talking and, well, we decided to do a little intervention. For your own good, of course." He smiled, but it was the kind of smile you'd give a disobedient dog. My heart sank. My home, this house filled with 50 years of memories, the scuffed floor where George taught me to waltz, the kitchen table where we shared our first meal, the worn armchair where he fell asleep with a book in his lap, was no longer my sanctuary. It had become, in their eyes, a problem to be solved. Laura then pulled out a sleek, modern dress from the box. "We just thought you needed an update, Helen. This old thing," she gestured vaguely at my favorite sweater, the one George had bought me on our honeymoon, "is just so dated. It's like you're a walking antique." Mark then stepped forward, holding up a pair of old lace-up shoes. "And I mean, really, Helen, you're a liability in these. What if you fall? We're just trying to protect you." Protect me? I felt their words like a physical blow. Their mockery was a public spectacle, and I the main attraction. The laughter that followed, a low, condescending rumble from my own children and their spouses, was the final drop of poison. They acted as if I were already a ghost, my presence a mere inconvenience. "Mom, you need to be realistic," Emily said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "This house is a money pit. The roof, the foundation, it's all falling apart. We've talked it over, and the sensible thing to do is sell. The market is great right now." They could see the numbers dancing in their eyes, the dollar signs flashing behind their practiced smiles. They weren't seeing me. They were seeing a dilapidated house and the inheritance they believed was locked inside. "It's just not practical for a woman of your age to manage all this," Daniel added, looking around with a critical eye, as if cataloging the flaws of my life. "You should be living somewhere where you can have help, where you're safe. It's for the best. Trust us." The room grew quiet, but the silence was heavy with expectation. They had cornered me. They had humiliated me. They had told me my life's work, maintaining this house, this monument to my love for George, was nothing but a liability. They were not my children anymore. They were vultures circling a carcass. The shame was a bitter taste in my mouth, and I felt a hot wave of fury rise in my chest. But what could I do? I was just an old woman in old clothes, or so they thought. In that moment of profound humiliation, a thought came to me, clear as a bell. The best revenge is not an angry retort, but a quiet, powerful action. It was then that a strange sense of calm washed over me. I looked at Daniel and his perfect suit, at Laura with her condescending smirk, at Emily and Mark, their faces tight with greed. They saw an old woman, but I suddenly saw myself as a warrior, one whose battle was just beginning. It was a secret I would have to keep for myself, a truth that would change everything. But in that moment, all I could think about was what my George would have done. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and heard them resume their conversation in hushed, excited whispers. I had to find something, anything to remind me of the man I loved, to find a fragment of his strength. I had to know what he would want me to do. But I never imagined what I would find instead.
The air in the kitchen was thick with the scent of roasted chicken and my unsaid words. I needed to get away, to be alone for a moment. My children's voices, so full of planning and entitlement, felt like a swarm of angry bees. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand trembling slightly. George had always been the rock, the quiet strength that kept our family steady. He was a simple man, a civil engineer who found joy in the details. The precision of a well-built bridge, the subtle colors of a sunset, the way our old swing set creaked in the wind. He wasn't a man of grand gestures, and he certainly wasn't a man of wealth. We had lived modestly, happily, or so I had thought. My children, however, had always seen our life as one of quiet failure. They had big homes, fancy cars, and children who went to expensive private schools. My life, filled with gardening and knitting and walks with George, seemed pathetic to them. They had spent years trying to upgrade me, to change me into a person I wasn't. But today, the disdain was no longer a gentle push. It was an outright demand. As I sipped my water, I looked at the old oak hutch in the corner. George and I had bought it from a small antique shop on our first anniversary. It was one of our most treasured possessions, filled with old photographs, worn teacups, and other assorted trinkets from our life. I hadn't looked inside it in years. It was in one of the bottom drawers, tucked behind a pile of old linens, that I found it. A small, leather-bound book. George's diary. I ran my thumb over the worn cover. I had never read it. George was a private man, and I had always respected that. But now, in my moment of profound loneliness, I felt an overpowering need to connect with him, to hear his voice again, even if it was only through his words. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one with the scratch on the corner from when Daniel, as a boy, had tried to carve his initials. I opened the diary to the first page. The neat, familiar handwriting greeted me. The early entries were simple, loving accounts of our life, of our joys and our small struggles. Then the entries changed. They became more complex, filled with numbers and technical drawings and references to something called Project Wisdom. I didn't understand most of it, but one phrase repeated over and over stood out. The treasure must be protected from the greed of the world. I thought he meant our love, our memories. But then on the last page he had ever written, I found a sketch of our house. It showed an arrow pointing to a small, nearly invisible section of the library's built-in bookshelf. My heart began to pound. George was an engineer. He was a man of blueprints and plans. This wasn't a metaphor. It was a map. I made my way to the library, my movements a mix of trepidation and anticipation. I ran my fingers over the faded wood of the bookcase, searching for a seam, a loose knot, anything. Then I found it. A small, tiny latch, so well hidden it was almost impossible to see, tucked behind an old copy of The Great Gatsby. I pressed it, and a section of the shelf swung open, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a single, large, brown envelope. I pulled it out and tore it open, my hands shaking. Inside were legal documents, a key, and a letter addressed to me in George's hand. As I read the letter, my world began to tilt on its axis. My simple, kind, engineering husband wasn't who I thought he was. The letter explained that Project Wisdom was a charitable foundation he had secretly created and managed. It was a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships for students who, like him, came from humble beginnings. And the kicker, the foundation was worth a fortune, a truly staggering amount of money. But that wasn't the biggest shock. The real twist was the revelation that he had been managing this foundation from our house, the dump they wanted to sell. The key was for a safe deposit box at a bank downtown, which held the legal documents and an emergency fund. He hadn't just been an engineer. He had been a benefactor, a philanthropist, a man who, in his quiet way, was changing the world. My George, the man they thought was a failure, had been a millionaire, a quiet titan of industry all these years. And the family, who had ridiculed me for my simple life, who had looked down on our modest home, had no idea they were standing in the middle of a gold mine. This secret, this immense truth, was mine alone. I still hadn't figured out what I was going to do with it, but the first thing that came to mind was revenge. a slow, satisfying, silent kind of revenge. What would my children do if they knew? The thought was a strange mix of terror and triumph. I imagined Daniel's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. I saw Emily's brittle composure crack, revealing the naked greed beneath. They were so busy trying to pry money from my hands that they never thought to look for something of real value. They thought I was the one who was losing my mind, but in fact, they were the ones who were blind. All this time, they had been complaining about a life of quiet desperation, while their father was living a life of quiet philanthropy, a life that was so much richer than any they could ever imagine. And I was the only person who knew. I was the keeper of his secret, the guardian of his legacy. The weight of this responsibility was immense, but so was the power. I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose that made my own humiliation seem small and insignificant. All those years of quiet service, of being just a wife and a mother, had prepared me for this. This was my moment, my chance to show them and myself that I was more than they had ever seen. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. My world had indeed been turned upside down, but in a way I never could have expected. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I would do something. I would show them all that I was not just a relic of the past, but the master of my own future. My life was about to begin again, and this time it was on my own terms. The thought sent a shiver of hope through me. The world was about to find out who Helen Harrison really was. And I still hadn't told anyone.
The weight of the envelope felt like a stone in my stomach, a secret so immense it threatened to swallow me whole. My children were in the other room, still bickering over the imaginary profits from the sale of my house. I could hear their muffled voices, a greedy chorus of calculations and plans for their inheritance. Daniel's voice rose. "We could split it 4 ways, but let's be real. Mom won't need 1/3 of her share. We can put it in a trust for her, of course, but it's really for us to manage." He said it so matter-of-factly, as if my very existence was a minor detail in their grand financial scheme. I folded the documents and placed them carefully back in the envelope. The letter from George explained everything. The foundation's headquarters was a small, inconspicuous office building downtown. He had instructed that I was the sole trustee, and the assets were held in a series of accounts and investments, all under the foundation's name. It was all so meticulously planned. So George. He had built this quiet empire not for himself, but for others. He had protected it from the world he knew, a world that, like my children, valued only what it could see. I walked back into the living room, a quiet storm brewing inside me. The change in my posture must have been noticeable. The hunched shoulders I had worn all day were suddenly straight. The expression on my face, which had been one of deep humiliation, was now one of quiet resolve. "Mom, we've found a real estate agent," Emily said, a triumphant gleam in her eye as she looked up from her phone. "She can come by this weekend and do a preliminary assessment." I smiled, a thin, mysterious smile that felt foreign on my face. "That sounds lovely, dear, but I think I'll make the call myself." My voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. This was the moment I had to play along, to buy myself time. Daniel, a man who believed in control above all else, narrowed his eyes. "What's wrong, Mom? You seem different." "Oh, nothing, dear. I'm just feeling a bit better now. It's so nice to have you all here looking after me." The sarcasm was so subtle it flew right over their heads. As the day wore on, I noticed Daniel's gaze following me. He was a predator, sensing a shift in the air. While I was in the kitchen getting more coffee, he slipped into the library. My heart pounded. I knew what he was doing. He was looking for something, a will, a deed, any scrap of paper he could find to justify his claim to our life's work. But the diary and the envelope were tucked safely away in my bedroom, hidden under the mattress. I had outsmarted him, and the thrill of it was like a jolt of electricity. The evening ended with them making veiled threats, promising to get a lawyer if I didn't cooperate.
I nodded and smiled and watched them leave, each one of them consumed by their own greed. I could see how years of living in a world of shallow ambition had changed them, had made them hollow shells of the children I had raised. I sat in the quiet of my living room, the house feeling more empty than it ever had. My husband, the man I had lived with for 50 years, had a life I never knew about. His secret was an immense, beautiful burden. It was a monument to his quiet strength, his generosity, and his deep understanding of the world. And it was all mine to protect. But what was I to do with it? I could expose them, tell them the truth, and watch their faces fall. Or I could keep it to myself, use the money, and prove to them that my life was not over, that I was not a liability. The doorbell rang, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a man in a perfectly tailored suit. He said, "Mrs. Harrison, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but my name is Walter Thompson. I'm the chairman of the board for the George Harrison Foundation. I'm afraid your late husband left a rather pressing set of instructions for me in his will, and I need to deliver them to you personally." My heart stopped.
I invited Mr. Thompson in, my mind reeling. I had so many questions, so many pieces of this puzzle to put together. He was a man with a kind smile and warm eyes, and he sat in George's old armchair, a stark contrast to the cold, calculating figures who had occupied it just an hour ago. "I can imagine this is a lot to take in," he said, his voice soft and empathetic. George was a remarkable man. He built this foundation from nothing but his sheer will and his belief that every person deserves a chance. He made me promise that if anything were to happen to him, I would deliver this to you as soon as I could. He handed me a small, sealed envelope. Inside was another letter from George, one I hadn't found. This one was different. This one was personal. "My dearest Helen," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I have left this world and you have discovered my secret. I am so sorry for the deception. I kept this from you not out of a lack of trust, but out of a fear that you would feel the weight of this responsibility, and a fear that you would not believe in the treasure I found. I have loved you all my life, and I know you will do the right thing." The letter went on to detail his final wishes. He had a set of instructions for the foundation, and they were non-negotiable. He wanted the house to be turned into a center for the foundation, a place for young people to come and learn. He wanted our furniture, the things my children had so gleefully dismissed, to be auctioned off for charity. And then came the twist that turned my stomach. "And for our children," the letter read, "I have left a small sum. They will receive it only if they can prove their kindness. I have watched them, and their focus has been on the material world. I pray that they will change, but if they do not, they will learn a bitter lesson." Tears welled in my eyes. The man I had loved for so long had seen the ugly truth of our children. He hadn't been naive, he had been wise. He knew their greed, and he had given them a test they had failed miserably. The next morning, the real estate agent, a slick-haired man named Richard, arrived at the house. My children were all there, hovering, their faces a mixture of excitement and barely contained impatience. "Well, Mrs. Harrison, I have to be honest," Richard said, looking around the living room with a condescending sneer. "This is going to be a tough sell. The furniture is all outdated. The house needs a lot of work. The best option is to sell it as is and let the new owners tear it all down." Daniel nodded in agreement. "See, Mom, we told you, it's a teardown." I stood up, walked into the hallway, and put on the old sweater they had laughed at. I walked back into the living room, my head held high. "Richard," I said, my voice steady and clear, "you can leave now. My children and I have a misunderstanding. This house is not for sale." They all stared at me, their mouths agape. Daniel was the first to speak. "Mom, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. We have a signed agreement. You said you would cooperate." "No, Daniel," I said, looking at him directly, the full force of my love and disappointment in my eyes. "I never said I would cooperate with a sale. I said I would call an agent, and I did.
I have all the power now, and you, my dear children, have none. You thought you could bury me alive, sell my memories, and take what you thought was rightfully yours. But you were wrong. The truth was out, and it was a shock to their system. But they hadn't learned their lesson yet, and I was about to give them the most elegant lesson of their lives.
The silence that followed my pronouncement was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of Richard, the real estate agent, awkwardly shuffling out the front door. My children looked at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and open hostility. "What do you mean you have all the power?" Daniel finally spluttered, his face turning a furious shade of red. "Are you getting senile, Mom? You can't just change your mind like this. We have lawyers." I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, my movements slow and deliberate. "You are more than welcome to hire lawyers, Daniel," I said, my back to them, "but I can assure you they will find nothing to help you." I turned to face them, the steam from my teacup a soft cloud around my face. "You see, for all these years, you believed your father and I were, well, that we were poor, that we had nothing but this old house. And you were right, in a way. We had what we needed, but what we had was also more than you could ever imagine." I didn't tell them about the foundation. Not yet. The joy of this moment was in the suspense, in watching them squirm with a delicious mixture of greed and fear. "Mom, are you hiding something?" Emily asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "Did Dad leave you a secret account? Is that what this is all about?" "Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't," I said, a faint smile on my lips. "What I will tell you is this. You've treated me like an inconvenience, like a piece of old furniture. You've laughed at my clothes, at my life, and you've assumed you had the right to it all, but you were wrong. And you will see, very soon, how wrong you were." The next few weeks were a strange, tense dance. They called every day, their voices a mixture of feigned concern and thinly veiled threats. I would answer them with a cool, detached politeness, each word a precise cut. "I'm doing well, thank you, Daniel." "Yes, I've had a lovely week." "No, the house is not for sale." I watched their frustration build, their anger simmering beneath the surface. It was a kind of power I had never had before, and it was intoxicating. I had spent a lifetime being a mother, a wife, a quiet presence in the background. Now, I was the one in control. I started to make my plans. I met with Walter Thompson again, and he showed me the headquarters of the George Harrison Foundation. It was a beautiful, unassuming building in the heart of the city. I was in awe. George had done so much good, quietly and without fanfare. I met some of the scholarship recipients, young people with bright eyes and big dreams who had been given a chance because of my husband's generosity. It was a feeling so profound, so much more deeper than the temporary thrill of revenge. I realized then that my dignity was something I didn't have to fight for. It was something I already possessed. Their humiliation of me was a reflection of their own emptiness, not of my worth. The anger I had felt was a natural reaction, but it was not the path forward. I would not lower myself to their level. I would teach them a lesson, yes, but I would do it with grace, with dignity, and with a quiet strength that would resonate for a lifetime. I would show them what true wealth was, and I knew the perfect way to do it. The old house, which they had seen as a relic, a burden, was now something different in my eyes.
It was a monument to a love and a purpose they could never comprehend. I walked through the rooms, no longer seeing the scuffs on the floor or the faded wallpaper. I saw the laughter, the quiet moments, the dreams we had built within these walls. My new purpose, my transformation, felt as if I was finally walking into the person I was always meant to be. I was not just Helen Harrison, wife and mother. I was the keeper of a legacy, a living testament to a man who understood that true value lay in kindness and generosity, not in dollar signs. I had felt so small, so invisible, but now I felt a power that transcended all their material ambitions. I was no longer a victim. I was an architect of a new beginning, a new purpose for myself and for this home that had given me so much. The sadness was gone, replaced by a quiet joy that was so much more fulfilling than any superficial victory. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning. I had a grand plan, a final act that would not only shock them, but would also make them face the truth of their own actions. The bitterness was gone, replaced by a strange, almost serene sense of purpose. I was not seeking revenge. I was seeking justice, a kind of justice that only the universe could provide. The final scene was set, and the curtain was about to rise. All that was left was to let them see their own reflection in the mirror of their actions. The day of the big reveal dawned, a crisp autumn morning. I had organized a small gathering at the house, a farewell of sorts. My children arrived, their faces etched with a wary curiosity. They still believed this was some kind of elaborate performance, a final, pathetic plea for their attention. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know what I was about to give them. My son Daniel, in a slick suit, looked around the living room with a sneer. "What is this, Mom? Are we here to watch you sign over the deed?" I smiled. "No, Daniel. This is a celebration of your father's life and his legacy." I gestured to a small table I had set up in the corner. On it were the documents, the diary, and a few other items I had found. George's old pocket watch, a fountain pen he always used, and a photograph of him when he was a young man, a look of quiet ambition in his eyes. "As you know," I began, my voice clear and steady, "you have all expressed your concern that I was unfit to handle my finances. You have called me a liability. You have called this house a dump. But you were wrong." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Your father, my George, was a remarkable man. You saw a simple engineer, but he was so much more. He was a visionary." I then proceeded to tell them about Project Wisdom, about the foundation, and about the immense wealth he had secretly amassed. Their faces, at first, were a mixture of disbelief and shock. Then, as I read from the legal documents, a new expression dawned on them, a look of pure, unadulterated greed. They were calculating the numbers in their heads, already envisioning a new car, a new house, a new life. "And so," I continued, "I am happy to announce that I have a gift for each of you, a gift from your father." I walked to the table and picked up 3 small, carefully wrapped packages. "This is for you, Daniel," I said, handing Jim a box. "This is for you, Emily," I said, handing her another. And finally, "This is for you, Mark," I said, giving the last one to my son-in-law. Their hands were trembling as they opened them. They expected a check, a deed, a key to a new life. Instead, they found what they had so cruelly mocked. Daniel opened his box and found the old, worn sweater he had called an antique. Emily's box contained the old lace-up shoes she had called a liability. Mark's box held the old, tattered photograph he had dismissed as junk. Their faces fell. Their disappointment was a palpable thing in the room. "What is this, Mom?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with a hollow rage. "Where's the money? Where's the inheritance?" I picked up George's diary, my hands firm. "You see, your father knew you. He knew your hearts. He knew you would only value what could be bought and sold. He left me with the power to change that. In his final will, he wrote that you would receive a share of the foundation's assets only if you demonstrated kindness and respect toward me. He watched you, and he saw nothing but greed." I then announced the final, devastating blow. "I have decided that this house will no longer be a family home. It will be the headquarters for the George Harrison Foundation. We will turn it into a center for young students, a place of learning and of kindness. It will be a monument to a man who, in his quiet way, changed the world." The bitter, soul-crushing realization dawned on their faces. Their laughter had cost them not just money, but their dignity, their family, and their father's last wish. They had lost it all, and they had only themselves to blame. They treated me like an old wreck, and now they were left with old clothes and bitter regret. As they stood there, a family of 3, united only in their shame, I finally felt at peace. I had not sought revenge, but justice. I had not taken their money, but I had taught them a lesson, and in the end, that was worth far more. I had found my strength, not in a hidden fortune, but in the quiet dignity of a woman who had finally found her voice. The house, which they had tried to strip of its value, was now more valuable than ever, a living monument to a man's generosity and a woman's newfound purpose.